Welcome to the Recruitment Hackers Podcast, a show about innovations, technology, and leaders in the recruitment industry. Brought to you by TalkPush, the leading recruitment automation platform.
Hello, and welcome back to the Recruitment Hackers Podcast. I'm your host, Max Armbruster, and today on the show, I'd like to welcome Jared Hummel, who is president at Parqa Digital Marketing Agency in Minneapolis. And Parqa is an agency that's focused on recruitment marketing for the staffing and recruiting firms. So we'll get a chance to ask Jared about this world and how it's evolving and how it's adapting to new technologies. Jared, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Max. I appreciate you having me.
My pleasure. And would you mind giving us a quick overview of how you ended up in the ungrateful, cutthroat world of recruitment?
Staffing and recruiting, right? Yeah, I got lost along the way. We have a sister company, Verseek Search and Consulting, which is a boutique agency in the Minnesota Twin Cities market. And I actually applied for a job with one of their recruiters, of which he then asked me if I wanted to be the CEO or CFO of Verseek, which I thought would be a good idea. Learned a little bit there for a few months, and then I got asked to run Parqa, the sister company, the digital marketing agency that was kind of floundering around at the time I came around, and we saw a pretty good market opportunity. And so the last 3 to 3.5 years, I've been really focused on growing that with our client base throughout North America.
And so you could say that you came into this recruiting world a little bit later in your career, right? So it was not like coming out of school or anything like that, which is where most of the industry comes from. This is a great way to make money at the start of a career if you're good on the phone. But I've noticed others have come into the industry later in their career and their experience is quite different. It's more like, wow, this is how you do things here.
Yeah, well, like you said, having come from outside the industry, I guess like ignorance is bliss sometimes, right? And so I think, for being probably early to mid-career versus like straight out of college, like I'm still naive enough to, state my opinion to the owners right out of the gate and tell them like what I think from a different industry perspective. But to your point, like I've got to be on the other side of it, having worked in manufacturing and then in the home service business, like, we would have the big companies calling on us all the time, trying to push labor into us. And so now seeing it not only from our sister company Verseek, from the industry as a whole in Parqa to, having clients throughout North America from IT to hospitals to finance and accounting, like seeing kind of the whole picture, has been a pretty interesting experience.
The questions that you come into your customers at Parqa, when you enter a new working relationship, what are some of the probing questions that you may ask to validate a company needs your help so we can situate your range of services?
Yeah, so Parqa itself is a full service digital marketing agency. So, we can really solve any critical pain point in the marketing arena for staffing and recruiting firms. As we were talking before, Max, like, especially in the United States, I can't speak necessarily worldwide, but staffing and recruiting firms are generally, 5 to 10 years behind from a marketing perspective. And so as we go into them, even if they have a CMO or a couple of marketers, it's, technology is moving so fast in today's world that it's really hard to have an internal marketing team unless you're a very large company that specializes in SEO, paid management, automation, MarTech stacks, website development, job board integrations, programmatic advertising. And so that's, one of the ways that we really enter in with new clients is either they have a CMO that presents a good strategy, but doesn't have the labor to necessarily execute at a high level, or vice versa. They might have 1 or 2 entry-level marketers, but, they're just kind of flailing, with organic social media or something that's not obviously driving results, and they would come to us to put something more holistic together to really try to drive an ROI.
You were giving me earlier a range of clients in terms of revenue, but I'd like to, for our listeners who haven't run an agency and wouldn't really know what those revenue numbers represent, could you frame that in headcounts? What's your typical staffing firm customer size?
Yeah, so we're constantly trying to push the envelope. So we're constantly trying to provide new services that are for bigger and bigger firms. But, kind of our wheelhouse at this very second is probably a headcount of 50 to like 5 to 10,000. So in US dollars, that would be 20 million to, close to $1 billion. So our agency at this point maybe necessarily hasn't worked with, the top 5 to 10 global staffing firms, but definitely some of our bigger clients are, multinational corporations. So,
and you said some of them with thousands of headcounts. I would assume that stage that they would have a dedicated digital team, but I would assume wrong. It sounds like they still come for help. They're a little bit late to the dance.
Yeah, the thing I learned coming from outside the agency is staffing and recruiting is kind of the consummate sales profession. And so probably, I don't know what the number actually is, but probably 80-90% of staffing firms are run by a leadership team of sales executives. And so what we've found, or what I've learned kind of coming from outside the industry, is that the solution to every staffing firm owner's problem, hiring 5 or 10 more recruiters or sales representatives to solve a revenue growth problem. And, that's something we're trying to fix, because I can promise you that there's more efficient ways to go about it. And, ultimately that's why we're talking today. We're trying to, like you, do things to make it a more automated and efficient process for organizations.
Well, you're trying to find similarities between our businesses, but in fact, what I'm hearing is that I resemble perhaps more closely the typical profile of a staffing firm company, because I come from sales, and I've often made the mistake of, let's just hire more headcount, in my case, more sales guys, but if it's a staffing firm, or more recruiters to push revenue up. And of course, you get a short-term lift, but long-term, you're not creating differentiation. So the investments that people have to make in databases and websites and SEO, these are things that take a while to yield results. These are long-term investments. Can you give us an idea of how patient a staffing firm would need to be before seeing some returns?
Yeah, well, like you said, I guess to me, it's almost a no-brainer, because if you look at, fully loaded compensation for a recruiter, and say you have to hire 10, I mean, you're talking close to $1 million. And then you have to deal with turnover. You have to deal with them not, meeting their quota, all of that stuff. And from a marketing perspective, I mean, you can see results fairly quickly. I mean, with the way the world works today, whether that's, programmatic job board advertising, whether that's Facebook integrations to their job feeds, marketing automation as a whole is, making a recruiter's process more efficient so that they can do more business with less headcount. And so, I mean, $1 million would get you a long ways. Even as a $500 million company, I mean, we could employ our full set of services for a good couple of years and drive some pretty good results for that, replacing that headcount.
And I 100% agree. I mean, I've seen that with our more successful customers, that they change their spend, and sometimes they don't even have to increase their advertising spend that much. They just have to spend a little bit wiser. In high volume recruitment, there's social media is very cost effective, provided you can qualify the incoming traffic automatically, and you don't have to have an army of recruiters to qualify all the incoming traffic. That's in my world, like Facebook, Instagram is one, very performing. What are some of the channels, digital or otherwise, that you see are trending well in your market?
Yeah, definitely the Facebook, Instagram world is a big play, especially in the industrial staffing world. And as we partner with clients that aren't necessarily in massive metropolitan areas, that might be in kind of the Midwest manufacturing environments, I think that the Facebooks of the world are definitely advantageous. As you get into some of the more finance, IT, engineering, obviously a lot of that spend shifts to LinkedIn. But I mean, the new craze, which I'm not the expert on, so I won't go into detail, but like TikTok's obviously the new thing going on in America anyways at this point. And they're working to launch kind of their TikTok resumes. I think it's called their TikTok jobs. And then, you're starting, I think we talked about this a little before, but I mean, you're starting to see the digitalization as a whole of the staffing and recruiting industry with more of the candidate user experience when it comes to like the Uberification of staffing. You're starting to see private equity money flow in to companies like that are just, I don't know if you call it marketing, but it's using technology to create a better candidate experience so that they want to use your platform, right? And so that would be another one. At the end of the day, Google is still Google, right? I mean, when you're in a pinch, generally in the United States, you go to Google and type in, jobs near me or headhunter near me, recruiter near me. And so, there's always still, at least for the foreseeable future, a substantial investment into paid advertising and just a search engine optimization on, Google platform.
When traveling was more popular, I used to do a lot of conferences, TA and staffing firm conferences in North America. And I was always amazed by the volume of job board and marketplace vendors. And there was usually a Google representative in the room, which looked like a wolf in a hen's house. Everybody was polite, but a little bit worried. Do you think that in a market where there's so much consolidation around the platforms that we just mentioned, LinkedIn and Google and maybe Facebook and TikTok, that the days of programmatic are numbered? Because if there's only 3 or 4 big channels where you advertise, you don't need an algorithm to help you place your ads.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid question. I mean, I think you're starting to see more sophisticated technologies coming out from the Googles and the Facebooks, or just, suppliers or vendors building things to make those experiences that much better. But yeah, I definitely can't argue with you. Like, we do have a lot of clients that are still using programmatic, but the efficiency of that is definitely in question moving forward with the big players.
Right. There's a existential threat. But then we didn't even mention Indeed and Zip and those guys. So, if you start to add those up, it does, you could see why a recruiter's head would explode having to manage these 4 or 5 different budgets on top of their daily work.
Yeah. And just knowing, like, I don't know, what Parqa is good at more than that we're like an expert at Indeed or an expert at Monster or whatever, is like providing a strategic solution for our clients that is numerically justified, right? Like, I think a lot of times, a recruiting manager that says like, their CFO gives them a $20,000 budget or whatever the number is, $200,000 budget, and says like, well, we have to have an Indeed contract. We have to have a LinkedIn contract. And all of a sudden, like, they're not even doing, like, they're just paying those people money to be a partner with them, but they're not actually coming up with a strategic solution that is quantifiably driving business results for them. It's just, well, we should be a part of Indeed. Well, our LinkedIn sales rep came to us and said we have to, pay X dollars for this many LinkedIn recruiter seats, and there's just no like thought process. It's just like they go from supplier to supplier saying like, yes, here's my $100,000, here's my $200,000, and that's what Parqa tries to bring all that together to say, like, let's look at your buyer personas, your ideal clients, your ideal candidates. Like, where are they living? What are they doing? How do we get to them in a way that's efficient? Like, the database, like, you have an accounting and finance firm that's been around for 15 years. How many of those candidates that you talked to 10 years ago are now managing directors in their role, and now they're hiring managers, and that could be more clients, it could be getting candidates out. Like, there's just so many ways to be efficient at it, and not to go all the way back to where we started, but the answer always is like, hire more recruiters, make more outbound calls, like, do more intakes. And it's not the future, right?
No. The future, it sounds like, would be start by measuring everything that you do, find out what your cost per hire per channel is, and then move your money there, and then get good at 1 or 2 channels better than your competitors.
Well, that's, like we talked about early on, we started, with, I guess you'd call them like mom and pop shops, but more that like 10 to 30 million range. And I guess at that point, you don't necessarily expect crazy sophistication. But what's really been surprising to me is as we moved into the 500 million plus accounts is they're really not any better at marketing attribution. It's really a free for all. They don't know where their money is going. They buy tools and pay for the tools, but quit using the tools. And so that's one of the things Parqa is really not mastered quite yet, but that's one of our big focuses heading into 2022 is I want to create a full attribution product essentially that,
dashboard.
Dashboard that is customizable but scalable, that we can go into these staffing firms and just quantifiably say what you just said. It's like you're spraying money everywhere. Why don't we just hone it in on two things that are working really well for you and then make your internal process more efficient? Because at the end of the day, if a recruiter can have, pick a number, if a recruiter can have 100 people out versus 50, they're commissioned salespeople, and that's a pretty easy sell to internal recruiters. Is like, if I can make your job this much easier, so you're focused on value-added items, and you can make $100,000 more while we do that for you. Like, would you be interested in hearing more? I think any rightful recruiter would probably raise their hand with some interest.
Yeah, I would listen to you, and if I was a business owner of a staffing firm, a small or mid-size, I would take, I would find it hopeful that even if you get to companies with a few thousand headcounts, there's not a methodology about channel marketing, and there's not that high level of an expertise, and that they still fall into these old patterns of hiring their way out of revenue plateaus. And I would, of course, go back to the basics, which is every year your market is different. The way your candidates behave changes. It's very dynamic. And so what worked 2-3 years ago may not work anymore. I don't know if the cycle is right, but it feels to me like 2-3 years would be like a good time to like reboot and rethink. Do you think that's about right? Is that the frequency at which your contracts are being reevaluated?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say 2 to 3 years, a couple of years ago was probably accurate. I would say like post-COVID, at least again in the United States, I can't speak worldwide, but I mean, there's definitely been a shock in the system. And I mean, there's more technology, more options, more things changing more rapidly than, any time before in staffing history. So that might be redefined to like 6 to 8 months or something at this point.
Yeah. It's been a bit traumatic. It has been quick. What are some of the tools or technologies that you've seen pick up over the last year that you think are trending well, that have high impact, high ROI for your customers?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, sometimes I feel silly saying this because I feel like we're not on the cutting edge, but for staffing and recruiting, we are. It's really like account-based marketing and marketing automation. I don't know if you're familiar with Bullhorn, but they're one of the largest ATS providers. Like, they just purchased Herefish. It was probably a year ago now. And Herefish is someone we worked with prior to Bullhorn acquiring them. And I mean, when I don't know what Bullhorn's revenue is off the top of my head, but when you're a company that large and Herefish, like a little 7-person startup, is like your golden ticket, like that something's changing in the industry. Sense is another product. I believe they're Google backed. They're not a Google company, but again, it's a candidate enablement software to automate the candidate experience. The job board integration thing is something that we do. I wouldn't say it's revolutionary technology per se, but building custom job board integrations to make sure that all, we talked about the mini job boards that exist today, making sure that they're able to scrape and do all of that from a technology perspective. And then I know it's not necessarily technology, but database management is one of the things that we're really trying to work with our customers on, because as these MarTech tools come into play, you run into a stone wall pretty quickly when the database is a disaster. And so really trying to educate the market on database cleanliness and operational best practices.
No, just this week, SAP SuccessFactors, which is more TA than staffing, but they made a small acquisition, which they almost never buy small tech companies. They wait for them to be big, but they just bought a company called Swoop Talent, specialized in improving the databases. You were mentioning Bullhorn acquiring Herefish, which is a company, I think Herefish is specialized in re-engaging and helping you get more out of your database. So, those are big trends, clearly. But what about, I know this isn't cutting edge either, but what about messaging and SMS and texting? Is that still got some growth ahead, or is that getting old? Is that established?
I think it's a little bit dependent on what vertical your firm is in, or the TA company that you'd be working with. Honestly, like in our value added, like if you're talking more the consulting world and like the high volume staffing world, I would say that text messaging is still very prevalent. I think that's how we're finding a lot of people prefer to communicate over email. I mean, I guess I can only speak for myself, but I get 1,000 emails a day to my personal email, but I only get 50 text messages. So when it's a value added service, I think text messaging still plays a pretty important role. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on your industry, but yeah, it's performing well. Okay, well, one question I always ask my guests is to walk us back to a day when you made a hiring mistake, and so that our listeners can draw some lessons from the pain that you experienced back then. And you don't have to name individuals, but it would help the exercise if you had one person in mind and you could walk us through why you made that mistake.
There's one that's just like glaring in my head, and I wish, like, I still to this day don't quite know how I made the mistake. But yeah, it was
Let's talk through it. Please lay down and open up.
Yeah.
I'm your therapist. We're gonna walk through it.
That's great. Yeah, so it was, I believe this person, it was a few years ago, I believe this person just applied through like a LinkedIn ad. So, our agency as a whole, probably 70% of our employees are referral based, and that automatically gives you like a little sense of security. Mm-hmm. So this one did come through LinkedIn, and, we have, not that we have like a crazy big process because we're not huge, but generally, like, I interview people first, because if they're not a culture fit, then I don't even care what their skill set is. Then they meet with the hiring manager to really assess the skill set and what's needed. And then the third is we kind of bring them into our, meet a couple of the other directors or a couple of the other teammates so that they get a feel of the overall culture. This person actually ended up meeting with our CEO. I don't remember why exactly, but usually our CEO's interviews are about 7 minutes long, and he's on to the next thing. He talked to this person for almost an hour and a half. And so my interview from a culture perspective was like, this person's great. He's going to be a good fit. Then we brought in the subject matter expert who has worked at large agencies throughout the Twin Cities. She thought this person was a great fit. The team met him, thought he was a great fit. Then I watched our owner talk to him for an hour and a half, and I'm like, there's no way in hell I can't hire this guy. I've never seen Tony talk to someone so long in his entire life. Mm-hmm. And so we hired the person. Within about 2 weeks, we realized that he knew literally nothing about digital marketing whatsoever. Right. Like, he had held a job at a large Fortune 500 company in a role that we were hiring him for 6 years, or according to his resume, for 6 years, and didn't even know the basics of, fundamental digital marketing. And so, it was probably about 3 weeks in when we knew like this was a train wreck and like we had to take care of it. And this person actually came to me and said, hey, like, I'm getting recruited by another agency. And I like literally sprinted into a closed office and was like, dude, you got to take this role. Like, this is the perfect role for you. Like, don't feel bad about it. It's no pain on our side. I think this is the right decision for you. And
what a gift. You don't get gifts like that too often.
I think I actually met this person like in a parking lot that very weekend to like exchange stuff to make sure that he didn't like renege on wanting to stay with us. I was like, let's get the key, like let's get everything taken care of. And yeah, it comes up in meetings probably on a monthly, if not quarterly or weekly basis of like, what the heck happened here?
Will you change your recruitment process? What have you learned from that experience? I mean, what I'm hearing is, there's no way to be 100% sure until day one, maybe, but perhaps as well, even if somebody sounds really good on paper, still ask them how they do things. How do you run this campaign? How did you accomplish those things? Don't skip that step. It sounds so obvious, but would you think that might have been skipped?
Might have been. No, I think that's having been industry agnostic my whole career, like I place a lot of value on culture and a lot of value on like my gut feeling, which we all know will fail you from time to time. And so I think, as we continue to scale, like you said, is having each director in our organization really put together like a test, quote unquote, to really quantify and measure aptitude, because when you're in startup mode and when you're growing rapidly, it's easy to take shortcuts, and yeah, we'll learn from that one.
And for our listeners, we'll learn from your pain, so thanks for sharing and opening up.
Yeah.
And where can they connect with you, Jared? What's the best way to connect with you or with Parqa? If we have a staffing firm, a recruiting firm listening who's looking for marketing help?
Yeah, so it's, simply www.parqamarketing.com, Parqa for the listeners out there. Jared Hummel on LinkedIn is definitely an easy way to track me down. But yeah, I think you find me on podcasts, doing videos with supplier partners. And then, our industry is still pretty large on like the trade shows and the state associations and whatnot.
It's coming back.
Yeah, so it's kind of exciting. I was in Chicago last weekend. I think we have Denver coming up in September and Florida in November. So kind of getting amped up to get back out and see people and shake hands and have some fun. So
awesome. Great. Well, thanks for coming on, and maybe see you on the road somewhere if I'm allowed to travel again.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Max. Obviously, you have a pretty crazy, awesome background and are doing some pretty cool things with TalkPush. So yeah, when we make our move from staffing to talent acquisition, maybe we'll find out some synergies together.
Sounds good.
That was Jared Hummel from Parqa Digital Marketing Agency, reminding us that recruiting should never get stale. And yes, traditionally, staffing firms will hire people who are salespeople, who are hyperactive, and they would want to focus on what they're good at, which is hitting the phone. But really, an effective recruiting marketing can carry so much more impact than a busy day on the phone. Every recruiting marketing strategy needs to be revisited on a regular basis, perhaps every couple of years. And you can do that internally, of course, but you can also reach out to agencies to come and help you through the process. Hope you enjoyed this interview and that you'll be back for more. Please share and post with friends. Thank you.